Welcome back to another Reading and Correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today, we are doing chapter 73 of Stepping Wild. Tibs looked at the people among the crowd he followed, trying to identify those mistreated by their ruling class. In other cities, those people were easier to find. Those abused by the city's systems looked it. A family barely holding on to their lodging looked like it was where every coin went. Their clothing were in tatters, no matter how fine they started as. They were thin, as they barely got afforded the minimum to subsist. At a glance, he'd have a handful of people who'd find silvers or coppers they'd somehow misplaced at the bottom of a drawer. Here, the city placed enough importance on everything appearing well that people put that first. The only place they couldn't was on the street. There wasn't enough of anything there for them to cover up what they had. They had nothing. He'd done what he could, but this street's copper were broken with a precision that meant they were well controlled. Too controlled to be the making of the street itself. Everyone else looked fine. Their clothing might be worn, but nothing that said they were in the process of being destitute. Even the way they moved gave little away, and the outside of every house looked fine. The whitewash was recent on all of them, and he watched a group applying it to all the houses along a street. Only sensing the wood and stone made them gave him a sense of which house did or didn't belong to someone in financial trouble. The need to appear as everything was fine explained to Tibs why the citizen had easy access to the clerics. If they were allowed to rot from the inside, they wouldn't be able to carry on maintaining the illusion the city was well governed. He was baffled by the amount of work the rulers put into it when so few people came. Were they so afraid the king would find out? And wouldn't it be easier to just make sure everyone had enough food and coin so they could live and work comfortably? Wouldn't it be easier to rule properly than building up the illusion they did? Were they so arrogant as to not understand that? With careful attention, he found people to leave coins with. He couldn't give them as much as he wanted. The change in their comfort would be noticed and questioned. Justified or not, they would be taken away for those and didn't always return. They would be taken and might not always return. He'd come to realize that many times when the nimble roamer kept guards from taking someone away, that had been the reason. More than once, he'd been left wanting to reach out and bring the city office down, to find the rulers and burn everything they had so they'd learn the wrongness of what they did. But he recognized it for his anger, and he knew the damage he'd caused this way would overshadow any potential good. Still, anytime he couldn't stop a guard from taking someone away, anytime he found himself feeling like the entire city was one street, pretending it was something else, he wondered if the satisfaction of destroying everything here might not be enough to do it. And because of that, he knew he couldn't be the one acting on it. With his proper paper in order, he was able to find official lodging where the scholar he claimed to be could keep his tools. One advantage to the efficiency of the system was that no one bothered checking a clerk had entered the information in the city's registry. He presented his permit, the library clerk looked at it, made an entry in the journal, allowed him in. So long as the dates were adjusted, the clerk didn't question his presence. Same with the lodging. So long as he had the permit and the coins, they didn't question his stay. The clerk had asked what he intended to research, and by then, Tibbs had decided on the kingdom's economic impact on its neighbors. It would let him it would let him excuse reading just about any book, since just about anything could be connected to a kingdom's economy. The library was as well appointed as any he'd visited, and surprisingly well frequented, considering how few people came to the city. It was possible that, like who he pretended to be, scholars from other cities worked through the arduous process of getting a permit, or the city simply had a large cast of scholars of its own. If it did, they certainly seemed better off than the rest of the city folks. There, they certainly thought they were. It was the rare scholar who hadn't reinforced that impression. Intellect, he'd often heard one of them say, was of the utmost importance, and the distraction of the common folks couldn't be allowed to get in the way. In their own way, they were like nobles, but at least the worst of their crimes amounted to disdain, indifference. It only took him a few visits to learn the forest of the lost was Sunrise Mid-Nadir of Torlaris. Its edge, starting 3 days galloped away, the closest village along it, was 2 weeks at horseback Sunrise Ward, or a month Sunset Ward. With that established, he searched for books that contained stories that could lead him to the dungeon, as well as anything that might address the elements, or even hinted of weaving with accents. He figured he'd need a year to settle the situation in the city, and he planned on making good use of the time he wasn't busy with doing that. She showed up a month after Tibbs started his research. He would have missed her, speaking with one of the librarian, if not for how his sense muddled where she stood. He used returning a book to its shelf as the reason to walk by them, taking in the copper hair, brown eyes, and the metal layers within the leathers. She glanced at him without stopping the conversation. 2 months ago, she returned her attention to the librarians, and Tibbs used an etching of air to carry the words to him as he stepped out of sight between shelves. "We get many visitors," the man answered. "It is impossible to remember each of them." "Really? I didn't see anyone around the platform." That you did not arrive at the same time as others does not mean no one comes." "Fine. How many of them are still here?" "He always stays until everything else he's doing is finished." Her accent was thick, but he wasn't sufficiently at ease with Fristier to tease it apart. But he thought he heard Latiranians in it. He had to show that permit everyone's coming here is forced to get, so you know who's here that arrived back then. A scholar's permit is verified when they pay for their admission. We do not record that information. Tibbs knew the information had been written. Did the scholar not appreciate her investigating the library? Erudite speech had an advantage in masking how someone felt. It all sounded condescending. "Why not? How can you not want to keep track of who comes and goes?" "That is the work of the intake office. Go bother them." "I can't unless I have a name to give them," she replied. "And I know he comes to this place. He always spends a lot of time in the libraries." "This is an institution of learning. Any who have gone through the steps to gain admissions are welcome here. Those who do come here to improve themselves and their understanding of the world. We don't take part in the chaos outside you claim he is connected to." "Oh, trust me, he works with that Romer character." Tibbs startled. How had she worked that out? There was nothing about the characters he created as a distraction that connected to anyone else he pretended to be, especially not the ones he used for his research. He narrowed the sense to her, trying to pick up a detail that might tell him who she was, but the muddiness obscured her nearly entirely. The only part of her he sensed without difficulty was below the knees. So the question was, how had she gotten her hand on one of those stones? Tibbs was familiar with that muddiness. He hadn't sensed it since breaking the large block of green stone and the guild had taken pieces away, but too many horrible memories were linked to the man who had brought it to his town for him to forget. Some of the pieces had made it out of the guild's control. Sebastian had gotten enough of them. Tibs had been powerless to save Karina, but he'd sensed it a few times since then, usually in the hands of powerful adventurers, most likely on a mission for that guild. For, for that guild, requiring negating someone or something's ability to affect essence. She didn't have an element, he could tell that, so she wasn't an adventurer, a hunter with an element after a reward. He hadn't paid attention, but the nimble roamer probably had a price on his head by now. Only the fact she knew he didn't work alone meant she'd worked out Romer was connected to the other characters he'd created in other cities, even if he'd made sure they all died before he moved on. It had taken decades for it to happen, but someone had made links he couldn't afford. If she, a woman barely out of girlhood, had worked out all those distant things were connected, others had to also be looking for the person behind those crimes. She might work for them, a trainee maybe? It wouldn't mean her teacher was nearby, and it explained how she came to have the stone. It didn't explain how they think she needed it. None of the characters he'd come across, none of his characters had come across as more than being out of Bart's songs. None of the essence he'd used had been noticed. Her presence meant he should leave. He had the information on the forest. Anything else would be added detail that, while helpful, weren't needed. He could research those in the next library, one he made sure wasn't associated with one of his characters. But his work in the city was barely begun. He had the guards grumbling about not being respected because of the weekly problem with their pay. The rivalries between those still receiving full pay and those who didn't had caused fights between them. The city tried to mitigate the disgruntlement by claiming the nimble roamer was behind it, but the advantage of making the roamer somewhat out of song was that everyone knew what he was, that if he had done it, it would have been a visible affair. As far as anyone was concerned, it was nothing more than the city looking to shift the blame. But he still didn't have anyone to stand up to the city. I'd only recently come across whispers there might be people organizing. If he left now, the city would regain control, tighten its hold on the people again, and nothing would change. Might grow worse as retaliation. He found where the book belonged and went looking for another one. But more importantly, she was just a girl, no older than he looked, but he had decades of experience at evading people far more skilled than she could be. Her teacher might be someone to be wary of, but they would be with her if they didn't think she could handle this. And if they got involved, well, Tibs had survived a dungeon or two, 3 now. He'd be careful she didn't find him as the scholar or nimble roamer, but she'd have to bring much more than her teacher for him to worry. And that concludes chapter 73 of Stepping Wild. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of that and support me in the process, that is on Ream's story, and we're, 20 chapters ahead. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.